on a bitter December dawn in Oakage, Maine. Dr. Emily Carter, a young veterinarian at a small-town animal clinic, was taking out the garbage early one morning when she heard an unusual sound near the dumpsters. It wasn't a meow, but a deep, raspy growl, distinctly wild. When she shone her flashlight beam inside one of the large containers, she froze. A massive bobcat crouched low over a pile of trash, golden eyes gleaming in the dim light. Its body was tense but unmoving, severely injured and dangerously thin. This powerful creature should be fighting or fleeing. Instead, it barely had the strength to growl. Seeing its thin frame and dulled coat, Emily recognized the signs of starvation and injury. But as her veterinary instincts kicked in and she examined her unexpected patient, she discovered a secret that changed everything. Why would a wild predator, known for avoiding human contact at all costs, seek refuge in a town dumpster? Join us for a story of desperation, hope, and the remarkable bond that can form between the wild and those who dare to help it. Before we start, hit the like button, make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so you won't miss any new stories. The December air bit through Dr. Emily Carter's thin lab coat as she pushed open the back door of Pinewood Animal Clinic. Garbage day. The mundane chore was part of her morning ritual as the newest veterinarian at the small-town practice. At 28, Emily had returned to her hometown of Oakage, Maine after veterinary school with dreams of making a difference. 6 months in, the reality of small-town veterinary work, complete with taking out her own trash, had replaced some of that idealism with pragmatism. Frost crunched beneath her boots as she dragged the heavy bags toward the dumpster. The sky was still dark, stars fading as dawn approached. Emily's breath clouded in front of her face, and she silently cursed herself for not grabbing her proper winter coat. Maine winters showed no mercy, even in early December. That's when she heard it. A sound that didn't belong among the typical morning noises. Not the distant rumble of early commuters on Main Street. Not the chirping of stubborn birds that refused to migrate south. This was something else entirely. A deep, raspy growl, distinctly wild. Emily froze, the hair on the back of her neck standing on end. Slowly, she lowered the garbage bags to the ground and reached into her pocket for her phone. Activating the flashlight, she held it out in front of her, heart hammering against her ribs. "Hello?" she called, immediately feeling foolish. Whatever made that sound wasn't going to answer her. She approached the dumpster cautiously, the beam of light trembling slightly in her hand. The sound came again, that same growl but weaker this time, followed by what almost seemed like a wheeze. With careful steps, Emily moved closer to the large metal container and shone her light inside. What she saw made her gasp and take a step back. A massive cat crouched over a pile of discarded food containers, its golden eyes reflecting the flashlight beam. But this was no ordinary house cat. The muscular build, tufted ears, and distinctive facial markings were unmistakable to anyone who'd grown up in rural Maine. A bobcat. A full-grown wild bobcat was in her dumpster. For several long moments, Emily and the bobcat simply stared at each other. The animal's sides heaved with labored breathing, and though it bared its teeth slightly, it made no move to attack or flee. Its tawny coat, which should have been thick and lustrous for winter, was patchy and dull. Even in the dim light, Emily could see the creature's frame was far too thin, ribs clearly visible beneath its fur. "You're not doing so well, are you?" Emily whispered, her veterinary training kicking in as she assessed the animal from a distance. The bobcat let out another soft, exhausted huff. It was then that Emily noticed the awkward way the animal held one of its front legs. Injured, starving, and seeking shelter in a trash bin. This wild predator was in serious trouble. Despite her better judgment, Emily knew she couldn't leave it there to suffer. If the animal had been healthy, she would have backed away and called Maine Wildlife Services to safely relocate it. But this bobcat clearly needed immediate medical attention, and the closest wildlife rehabilitation center was over 2 hours away. With a deep breath, Emily backed away slowly. "Don't go anywhere," she murmured, though the animal's condition suggested it wasn't going far. Inside the clinic, she gathered supplies with the practiced efficiency of someone used to animal emergencies: a heavy-duty transport crate, thick protective gloves, a catch pole, sedatives, and a heavy blanket. She also grabbed her proper coat this time and quickly texted Dr. Pearson, the clinic owner, to let him know she'd be starting her morning a bit differently than planned. When she returned to the dumpster, the bobcat was still there, having barely shifted position. That alone was concerning. Wild predators, especially when injured, typically fled at the first sign of human presence. The fact that this one remained suggested it was either too weak to move or too desperate for the meager scraps it had found. Emily set down her equipment and opened the crate, positioning it close to where she'd need it. She prepared a sedative in a syringe, attached it to a pole injector, and took a steadying breath. "Okay, buddy," she said softly, her voice calm and even. "I know you're scared, but I'm going to help you." She expected resistance, a fight, the fury of a cornered wild animal. Instead, the bobcat watched her with weary, dulled eyes as she carefully approached, with the blanket held out in front of her like a shield. When she was close enough, Emily quickly draped the heavy fabric over the animal's head and upper body, a technique she'd used with frightened feral cats to reduce visual stimuli and decrease stress. The bobcat let out a weak growl but didn't struggle as much as she'd anticipated. With careful, deliberate movements, Emily managed to secure the animal and guide it into the crate. The lack of resistance was both a relief and deeply troubling. A wild predator. This docile was in far worse shape than she'd initially thought. Once secured in the crate, Emily carefully transported her unexpected patient through the back entrance of the clinic and into the treatment room. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows through the windows. She had about an hour before the rest of the staff arrived, and clients began showing up for their appointments. Under the bright lights of the examination room, the bobcat's condition was even more alarming. What Emily had assumed was a male, based on its size, she now saw was significantly underweight, probably half of what a healthy adult bobcat should weigh. The patchy fur revealed skin with poor elasticity, a telltale sign of dehydration. The injured front leg bore a deep, infected wound that had clearly festered for days. "What happened to you?" Emily murmured as she prepared a light sedative. She wouldn't fully anesthetize the animal without consulting a wildlife expert, but she needed it calm enough to treat the wound and conduct a thorough examination. Once the sedative took effect, Emily worked quickly, cleaning the wound, drawing blood samples, and checking for other injuries. She administered fluids for the dehydration and antibiotics for the infection. Throughout the procedure, she talked to the bobcat as she would to any patient. "You're going to feel better soon," she promised, gently palpating the animal's abdomen to check for internal injuries. Her hands paused as she felt something unexpected. Frowning, she pressed more deliberately along the bobcat's lower belly. The fullness there contradicted its otherwise emaciated state. Emily wheeled over the portable ultrasound machine. As the image formed on the screen, her eyes widened. "Oh my God," she whispered. The bobcat wasn't male at all, but female. And she was pregnant. Very pregnant. Emily stared at the screen, counting at least 3 distinct shapes moving in the mother's womb. The kittens appeared well developed, meaning birth was imminent. No wonder the bobcat had been desperately scavenging. She wasn't just fighting for herself, but for her unborn litter. The discovery changed everything. What began as a wildlife rescue had become a delicate crisis. A pregnant bobcat needed specialized care Emily's small-town clinic couldn't provide. She needed expert help. Leaving the sedated bobcat under the watch of Lisa, the veterinary technician who just arrived, Emily retreated to her office and called Mike Jensen, a local wildlife rehabilitator she'd collaborated with before. "A pregnant bobcat?" Mike repeated after Emily explained. "Found in a dumpster? That's unusual." "I know," Emily agreed. "But she's in bad shape, malnourished, dehydrated, with an infected leg wound. I've started fluids and antibiotics, but—" She swallowed. "The ultrasound shows at least 3 kittens. They could come any day." A pause. Then Mike sighed. "I'll be there in 45 minutes. Don't move her again. Keep her calm and continue fluids. We'll handle this together." "Thanks, Mike," Emily said, relief flooding her voice. For the next hour, Emily juggled scheduled appointments with checks on the bobcat. She briefed Dr. Pearson, who studied their unusual patient through the observation window. 20 years here, and I've never had a bobcat in the clinic," the older vet remarked. "Let alone a pregnant one." He nodded at Emily. "Good work, Carter." When Mike arrived, Emily was finishing a routine vaccination. The rehabilitator, a burly man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard and sun-weathered skin, looked every bit the outdoorsman he was. Despite his rugged appearance, he was renowned county-wide for his gentle handling of wildlife. "Where's our mama to be?" he asked without preamble. Emily led him to the isolation room. The bobcat was awake now, curled in her crate, but tracking their movements with wary golden eyes. "She's beautiful," Mike murmured, his voice softening. "Lynx rufus, one of North America's most adaptable predators. They usually avoid human contact at all costs," Emily said. "That's what has me worried. She didn't even try to run when I found her, and look how thin she is." Mike nodded grimly. "Something's forced her out of her territory. Could be development, could be a larger predator, could be lack of prey. Hard to say. But she's in crisis, that's for sure." For the next half hour, Emily assisted as Mike performed his own assessment. His experienced hands moved confidently as he checked the animal's condition, confirmed Emily's findings, and took additional measurements. "I'd put her at about 3 to 4 years old," he said. "Young for a bobcat, but she's had at least 1 litter before, based on the teat development. The pregnancy looks to be in the final stage. I'd guess she'll deliver within the week, possibly sooner." "What are her chances?" Emily asked, voicing the question that had weighed on her since discovering the animal. Mike's expression turned carefully neutral. "Hard to say. She's in rough shape, but bobcats are survivors. The kittens are the bigger concern. Even if she delivers successfully, her body may not produce enough milk given her condition." He met Emily's eyes. "I've got a facility that can accommodate her, but she'll need round-the-clock monitoring until she delivers." "I can help," Emily offered immediately. "I can come by after my shifts here." A small smile broke through Mike's professional demeanor. "I figured you'd say that. Most vets would have called Fish and Wildlife and washed their hands of it. Not many take personal interest in a wild predator." Emily shrugged, feeling self-conscious. "I just want to give her a fighting chance." Together, they carefully transported the bobcat to Mike's wildlife rehabilitation facility on the town's outskirts. The property spanned several wooded acres with enclosures designed to mimic natural habitats while allowing observation. For the pregnant bobcat, Mike had prepared a quiet, secluded space, an indoor-outdoor enclosure with a heated den box where she could feel secure while being monitored via discrete cameras. After settling her in, Mike showed Emily the monitoring equipment and walked her through his specialized care protocol for pregnant wildlife. The key is minimal human interaction, he explained. We need her stress levels low. All feeding and treatments should be quick and consistent. No sudden movements, no loud noises. Emily nodded, absorbing the information. Domestic cats were familiar territory, but a wild pregnant bobcat presented unique challenges. I've cleared it with Dr. Pearson to adjust my schedule, she told Mike. I can be here every evening and early morning before my shifts start. Mike studied her, his expression unreadable. You know there's a good chance this might not end well, right? She's severely compromised, and wild animals don't always respond to intervention like we hope. Emily met his gaze steadily. I know, but we have to try. And so began Emily's new routine. Each morning before sunrise, she drove to Mike's facility to check on the bobcat, administering medications, providing fresh food and water before heading to the clinic. Each evening after her shift, Emily would return to the rehabilitation facility to monitor the bobcat's condition. She would carefully record vital signs in the medical log and sometimes simply sit quietly outside the enclosure, observing. Mike had named the wildcat Sierra, after the rugged mountain ranges where these elusive felines typically thrived. During these quiet evening visits, Emily found herself talking softly to Sierra, sharing stories about the patients she'd seen that day at the clinic, discussing the weather forecast, or whatever thoughts came to mind. The bobcat would watch her with those intense golden eyes, always alert, but no longer showing the fearful defensiveness of their first encounter. 2 days after bringing Sierra to the facility, Emily arrived for her evening check to find Mike already there, his weathered face creased with concern. Her temperature's dropped, he said without preamble, and she's been restless all afternoon, arranging and rearranging the bedding in the den box. Emily's heart quickened. Labor signs? Mike nodded, his eyes never leaving the monitor displaying Sierra's enclosure. I think so. Could be tonight, could be tomorrow. Hard to predict with wildlife, but all the indicators are there. They decided to take shifts monitoring Sierra through the night. Mike would take the first watch until midnight, then Emily would take over until morning. As she drove home to grab a few hours of sleep before her shift, Emily found herself oddly anxious. Despite her extensive veterinary training, she had never witnessed a wild bobcat giving birth. The process itself was natural, but Sierra's compromised condition made the outcome far from certain. When Emily returned to the facility just before midnight, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. Mike met her at the door, his expression a mixture of concern and excitement. She's in active labor, he said, leading Emily quickly to the monitoring station. Started about an hour ago. First kitten should be coming soon. On the monitor, they could see Sierra in the den box, her body taut with contractions. The resourceful bobcat had created a nest of the soft materials they'd provided, arranging them into perfect circular bedding that would cradle her newborns. Should we intervene? Emily asked, her medical training instinctively making her want to assist. Mike shook his head firmly. Not unless something goes catastrophically wrong. Wild mothers know what they're doing, and human interference could cause her to abandon or even harm the kittens. We watch, we wait, we only step in if absolutely necessary. For the next several hours, Emily sat beside Mike, their eyes fixed on the monitor as Sierra labored. Shortly after 2 a.m., the first kitten arrived, a tiny, blind bundle that Sierra immediately began to clean with methodical licks. Despite her weakened state, her maternal instincts were strong and sure. That's it, girl, Mike murmured, a rare show of emotion cracking through his professional exterior. You know what to do. The second kitten followed 40 minutes later, and the third 30 minutes after that. Each time, Sierra performed her maternal duties with impressive efficiency, cleaning each newborn, stimulating them to breathe, and guiding them to nurse. By dawn, Sierra was curled protectively around 3 healthy bobcat kittens, all nursing successfully. The new mother looked exhausted but alert, her golden eyes occasionally glancing toward the camera as if aware of their observation. 3 healthy kittens, Mike said, the relief evident in his voice. Given her condition when you found her, that's nothing short of miraculous. Emily could only nod, too overcome with emotion to speak. The sight of the wild mother nurturing her offspring that might never have survived had Emily not investigated that sound in the dumpster, filled her with a profound sense of purpose. This was why she had become a veterinarian. Over the next few weeks, Emily continued her twice-daily visits to monitor Sierra and her growing kittens. The mother bobcat's health improved steadily with proper nutrition and medication. The infected wound on her leg healed completely. Her coat began to regain its natural luster, and she became increasingly active and alert. The kittens grew at an astonishing rate. Their eyes opened after 9 days, revealing the same golden hue as their mothers. Their distinctive spots became more defined, their movements more coordinated as they developed. Each kitten displayed unique personality traits that emerged daily. One was adventurous, always the first to explore new additions to their enclosure, the first to climb the provided logs, the first to investigate any changes in their environment. Another was cautious, carefully observing every new situation before proceeding. The third was endlessly curious, seemingly fascinated by everything around them, especially the camera lens through which Emily and Mike observed their progress. One kitten remained cautious, always observing its surroundings carefully before taking any action. The second was curious, its bright eyes seeming fascinated by everything, especially the camera lens through which Emily and Mike observed them during their daily monitoring sessions. As spring approached, bringing warmer weather and longer days, Mike began discussing their next steps. They stood together at the observation window, watching Sierra demonstrate hunting techniques to her attentive offspring using a specially designed toy that mimicked the movements of small prey. "They're thriving now," Mike said, his voice carrying both satisfaction and resignation. "But they can't stay here indefinitely. They're wild animals, Emily. That's where they belong." Emily knew he was right, though the thought of releasing Sierra and her kittens filled her with conflicting emotions, immense pride at their recovery, but also a quiet sadness. Despite maintaining professional distance throughout the rehabilitation process, she'd grown unexpectedly attached to the little family. "Where will they go?" she asked, watching as the curious kitten pounced playfully on its mother's tail. Mike unfolded a topographic map across the observation table. "I've been in contact with the State Conservation Department. There's a protected wilderness area about 100 miles north of here. Excellent prey population, minimal human interference, and plenty of suitable territory for a female bobcat with kittens. It's their best chance." The release was scheduled for early May when the kittens would be strong enough for the transition, but still young enough to learn critical survival skills from their mother in the wild. Emily arranged to take a rare day off from the clinic to accompany Mike and 2 conservation officers to the release site. The morning of the release dawned clear and bright. The drive was quiet, the atmosphere in the vehicle a mixture of professional anticipation and quiet reverence. The Bobcat family traveled in a specialized transport container in the back of Mike's truck, with Sierra under light sedation to minimize stress during the journey. When they arrived at the release site, Emily stepped out into a forest clearing transformed by spring. Wildflowers dotted the landscape between towering pines, and the air hummed with new life. Fresh leaves unfurled on deciduous trees, creating dappled patterns of sunlight across the forest floor, a perfect setting for this new beginning. Mike and the conservation officers handled the final preparations with efficient movements born of experience. When everything was ready, Mike turned to Emily and surprised her by saying, "You should do the honors." His usually gruff voice was uncharacteristically gentle. "You're the reason they're here today." With suddenly trembling hands, Emily approached the transport container. Through the ventilation opening, she could see Sierra's alert golden eyes tracking her movements. The kittens huddled close behind their mother, miniature replicas of her wild beauty, their spotted coats fluffed in anticipation. "Goodbye, Sierra," Emily whispered, her throat tight. "Take good care of your babies." She unlatched the container door and stepped back quickly to give them space. For several heartbeats, nothing happened. Then, with deliberate slowness, Sierra emerged. The bobcat paused at the threshold, her powerful body tense as she scanned the forest surroundings with those unmistakable golden eyes. Her head lifted as she sampled the air, taking in the sense of her new territory. The kittens peeked out from behind her, their coats, patterned with nature's perfect camouflage, blending seamlessly with the play of light and shadow on the forest floor. Sierra took a few cautious steps forward, then turned back to her offspring. With a subtle vocal signal, too quiet for human ears but perfectly clear to her kittens, she communicated that it was time. One by one, the kittens emerged. The adventurous one bounded forward immediately, eager to explore. The cautious one tested each step with deliberate care. The curious one paused halfway out to look back at the humans one last time before following its siblings into their new life. Sierra led her family toward the tree line, her movements growing more fluid and confident with each step away from captivity. Where once she had moved with the weakness of starvation, now her powerful muscles rippled beneath her healthy coat. The last Emily saw was a flash of spotted fur as the curious kitten disappeared into the undergrowth, following its mother and siblings into the wilderness where they belonged. Mike came to stand beside her as the forest swallowed the last traces of the bobcat family. "You did good, Doc," he said simply. And for once, Emily didn't correct him about not being an actual doctor, because in this moment, having helped give these wild creatures their freedom back, she felt like she'd done something truly worthy of the title. At the forest's edge, Sierra paused. The bobcat turned her magnificent head, her golden eyes finding Emily's across the clearing. For one breathtaking moment, woman and wildcat regarded each other, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Two mothers of different kinds, one who had given life and one who had helped preserve it. Then, with a final flick of her tufted ears, Sierra turned and vanished into the undergrowth. Her kittens followed close behind, their spotted coats flashing like dappled sunlight for a few fleeting seconds before the forest claimed them completely. "They'll be okay," Mike said, coming to stand beside Emily. His voice carried the weight of decades of wildlife experience. "She's strong now, and she's a good mother. They have every chance." Emily nodded, brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "I know," she whispered. "It's just, when I found her in that dumpster, I never imagined it would lead to this." Mike's smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "That's the thing about wildlife rehabilitation. We never know which interventions will matter most. Sometimes," he watched the trees where the bobcats had disappeared, "it's the cases that seem hopeless that end up meaning everything." As they packed their equipment, Emily stole one last look at the forest. Somewhere in that wilderness, a family that might never have existed was beginning anew, wild and free as nature intended. The next morning, Emily arrived at Pinewood Animal Clinic to find a small package on her desk. Inside lay a framed photograph. Sierra curled protectively around her three newborns, their tiny bodies nestled against her tawny fur, all captured by the enclosure's camera on that miraculous night. Mike's note read, "Thought you might want a reminder of why we do what we do. M." Emily traced the frame with her fingertips before placing it prominently on her desk, where she could see it during every appointment, every surgery, every moment of doubt. As if summoned by the gesture, Lisa, the vet tech, knocked. "Dr. Carter? There's a woman here with a raccoon kit. Found it orphaned by the roadside." Emily stood, smoothing her lab coat. "Tell her I'll be right there." Following Lisa to the exam room, she glanced back at the photograph. One rescue had become 4 lives returned to the wild, 4 hearts beating freely where they belonged, and now another small creature needed her. This, she thought with sudden clarity, was why she'd become a veterinarian. This was where she was meant to be.